Hi and welcome to this video. My name is Yannis and I want to share with you how you can use your electronic drum kit together with Ableton Live, which is some amazing combination because instead of relying solely on the onboard computer and the onboard samples, you can trigger all sorts of sounds inside Ableton. So for example, drum samples that you bought somewhere or that you recorded somewhere, other types of samples like voice samples or bass samples, but also you can control synthesizers. So if you're into sound design, you can play your own synth patches, or if there are some certain patches you like, you can play them expressively with your electronic drum kit. And I find this super amazing because it basically transforms the role of the drummer into a full musician that can play all sorts of sounds, even melodic sounds. And I want to walk you through a couple of examples on what you can do. So I want to start with the basics, the Midi connection. So you see how you can set up the connection between your kit, which can be really any kit, and Ableton Live, how you can trigger some samples or how you can use the drum racks inside Ableton Live, and also how you can create some more creative setups for live performance. For setting up the basic connection, you need something called Midi, and it can happen either through Midi cables or through USB cables. So if you check the back of your computer, you will either see like a Midi output, like a 5-pin output, or also like a USB output. And USB is always more simple, but in case you don't have one, just look for the Midi output. And then this one needs to go into the Midi input of, for example, your audio interface. Or if you don't have an audio interface, you can consider getting like a Midi to USB adapter, which is anyway kind of simpler. So there are those cables that basically have MIDI on one side but also USB on the other side. So it's basically like a USB connection. And speaking about the audio interface, I recommend using one because it's better for latency. And since you're playing drums, you really depend on latency. And it's possible to use some headphones and to just plug them into the headphone output of your laptop. However, it's not the most stable connection, and especially with short latencies. And latency means basically the delay that you get from the signal traveling to your computer. I think audio interfaces just give you a more pleasant experience, especially for drums, because you hit something and you want to have the sound directly. You don't want to have a delay. It's kind of impossible to play like that. So if you don't have one, just consider getting one. But it's not necessary for checking the main connection. So after you connected the computer of the drum kit to your computer, you can just play a pad and see if on the upper right corner this button actually flashes up. And it flashes yellow, which means we get a MIDI signal. If it's not the case, just go to your preferences. So you go to Live and Preferences and to link Tempo MIDI. And here you see in my case, it's the audio fuse, and track is enabled because that's important. If I disable track, I won't get a signal. So normally if you connect a new device, track is automatically enabled, but if for some reason that's not the case, just check the setting here. And now we can already load up a drum rack, and you see I actually have one here already that created some sound, but you can go to drums and then check all the drum racks you have. So this depends on your version, of course, but you can simply double click on a drum rack and load it in, and then you will get the sounds, and then you should already be able to play some of them with your drum pad. Now, there's kind of a random component what sound you find on what pad, because those drum racks are designed for those little Ableton controllers, so you can quickly play with your fingers. And there are some regularities. For example, the kick drum always triggers the kick drum normally because all those pads have something assigned called a MIDI note, which is basically like a number that defines what MIDI signal gets sent to the computer and therefore what kind of sound it triggers. And I mean, bass drum usually works. Snare usually works, but then it already starts getting a bit interesting. So here we get those in kind of experimental sounds on the toms. While if we load up another kit, it might be slightly different, although the kick drum is the kick drum again, and the snare. And here we get some, see, here we, for example, get some shaker. And you can change those pads or move those pads. And it's really useful that on the left side you see what note you trigger. So you see actually the drum rack is huge. You have lots of sets of 16 pads, and usually it's only one set of 16 pads being used. And once I, for example, play the second tom, you see it says high tom, but I can also, now that I know that this pad actually is the note that I trigger with my mid tom, if I want to have the mid tom, I can also move the mid tom here, and then those two pads actually change position. Now I will trigger a mid tom. And if there's a drum rack you really like, but you also want to integrate one sample that you also really like, you want to have it all inside one drum rack, you can also go to your sampling menu, or here let's do it with the individual drum hits. So let's say there's a clap that you really want to have inside this rack. You can also just bring in this simple clap and just replace sounds here. So it's really simple. Maybe all is smooth, but there's also a chance that you face a little delay, which is the latency I mentioned. And this might be due to the fact that you don't have some audio interface, but you can also see how far you can go inside the preferences again, because you have some settings here. And you see I'm on 64 samples, which is like a very fast buffer size. The buffer size is important because this basically determines the latency. I'd say for drums, 128 is also fine. 256 for me is already too much. Some people might get away with it, but the higher you go, the bigger the latency will get. So it's super impossible to play drums at like 1024 samples, for example. But it's something you should check. So if you open this menu and this is on like 1025, 24 or 512, try to increase it. But also depending on the audio card, the audio driver that you have, you might not even be able to get to 64 samples, but just try the highest. It is possible to play without getting any glitches. That's what's important for the buffer size and also for the latency. And you can also try to play a bit with the error compensation. Actually, I also have it turned on. I think it's still from another patch, but there are no issues here. But if you play with this and maybe lower it, you might also be able to get some compensation for the delay. But this is something that is really unique to every setup, and don't hesitate to just move knobs or to just move this value and see what happens. And as long as you can get a better result and no glitches like those sounds in audio, you're usually good. For the sample rate, also 44.1 is totally sufficient. I use a higher one, but it doesn't really matter. So also lowering the sample rate can help making the audio a bit smoother in case you face some issues. Oh, and one more thing. If you're using your headphones plugged in directly to the laptop, you usually have some output here called, I don't have it here, but it would say like external headphones. And otherwise you choose your sound card. So in my case, it's the audio fuse, my interface. And yeah, here you normally have different options. I could also use my MacBook speakers for hearing the sound. Or maybe if you have some speaker that you want to use for hearing the audio of your drum kit, you can also connect it to the laptop directly. Again, eventually with the latency issues. Another super important thing for playing electronic drums is the velocity. And velocity is basically the intensity of your strokes. So a low velocity would look like this, and a high velocity would look like this. So you see, high velocity strokes are louder than low velocity strokes. But this is what's really important in order to feel comfortable playing, because also, if you play some acoustic instrument, you get the natural response, because if you make slower or softer movements, you get less sound compared to bigger movements, louder sounds. But here you already get some good example on how static this sound is, because it's exactly the same sound, just a little softer and a little louder. And it feels a bit one-dimensional to me. And you can always go to the sample setting by, in this case, going to the snare drum and opening the sample menu. It might look a bit intimidating, but you only have to look for the controls that you find here, and you get some setting here for velocity and volume. So it's on 50%. If it's on 0%, we don't get any reaction to the velocity. So all notes are exactly at the same level. Sometimes it might be what you need. But you can also increase the effect by going to 100%. Already way more comfortable. So this is something you should know, because 50% didn't really feel great to me, and 100% is actually way more fun. By the way, in case you enjoyed this video and also feel like supporting the channel, you can quickly hit the like button and also be warmly invited to subscribe, since you can find many videos about music production, performance, Ableton Live, and also the drumming aspect. But until now, I've been mostly using the Nord drum, also creating hybrid patches, and you're warmly invited to check out some more videos. I'm going to link some down below in the description. But this is the first one about the electronic drum kit, and I'm really excited about making more content about it, because I think you can do so many great things with it, triggering all sorts of sounds, creating hybrid patches, becoming some sort of one-man band. But also I need some feedback in case you're interested. So if you want to see some more videos like this, just leave me a comment and let me know. And yeah, this would really help me out here. And you see, it can be quite fiddly if for any sound you need to go into this sample menu and change the velocity reaction. And that's why I'm not such a huge fan of using drum racks with my electronic kit. It's possible, but from my experience, it always needs some adjustments because it feels awkward at first because it's not sounding so dynamic or responding so dynamically. And also it's 16 sounds. I never need 16 sounds. And there's an alternative way of creating drum racks because you can also create them from scratch. And maybe that's also something that you find interesting. So you can load some empty drum rack, which is the first option you get here. And now it's basically some empty drum rack and you load the samples yourself. And I prefer this to the other way because now everything is empty and we can really focus on every sound and actually set it up in the way that we feel comfortable and then continue adding another sound. And you can simply play, for example, the kick or the snare. You see, okay, snare is D1, perfect. Let's look for some snare samples. And we can open the drum hit menu, or maybe you also have some other folder with certain samples. You can load all sorts of samples wherever you get them from into the drum rack, which is really amazing. And simply get a snare, maybe like a 70s MPC. Cool. Again, we have some control for velocity to volume. So here it's without any dynamics. And here we get lots of dynamics. But now we can actually focus on it sound per sound and we don't have the full drum rack already. That is a bit overwhelming. You also see it looks a bit different here because there are two modes of sampler. There's the classic mode, which we had before, where you can find this setting here. And the other one is like the one-shot mode. For those samples, it doesn't really matter for now because you usually get like, it's usually always like a one-shot sound and you only need to look for this particular setting. I think here you, it just, yeah, on the one-shot mode, it's not under controls. Otherwise, it's under controls. I know it's the problem with the software. You can face lots of special cases where depending on what kind of mode you use, it looks a bit different. So this is something you have to deal with. But velocity reaction to volume, that's what you want to look for in the first place if you create your own drum kits or if you want to modify some existing ones. And you basically fill up your drum rack until you're comfortable. So it's a very simple and intuitive process. You basically look for samples, drag them into the drum rack and modify a little, maybe the sound or even like the velocity reaction. And then you're quite set for playing. But there's another option I want to share with you that is incredibly fun, which is that you can layer sounds. And let's create a kick drum. Maybe like a kick 70s here on the C1. So we get a kick drum. And now, once you're on the kick drum, you can actually have to select the sampler. So you click here and press Command G. And what happens now is that we get some instrument rack, which is basically a group that can contain different sounds. So if we, again, it can be a little complicated with all the menus, but I think you can get into it if you repeat this process a couple of times. Open again the view where you have the content of the instrument rack. You see we have a kick here, the kick 70s, but maybe we want to mix it with some huge 808. So we also bring the 808 in, and now we have two layers of sound that we trigger at the same time. And we can also mix them. So like this would only be the kick. Like this would only be the 808. And then we basically create our little mix. Speaking about synth sounds, you can also play synth sounds chromatically or also sample. So if you, maybe let's pick another sound. Actually, let's stick to bass, just some dual oscillator bass. And if we trigger it with the drums, now we get some different pitches depending on the note we play. So I guess the bass drum is like a lower pitch. So you see, we get all those different sounds. And first of all, it's really loud. And second of all, we want to have some, again, lower sound. We can maybe choose pitch again. So that's really useful if you're using electronic drums. And you can see this is super fun, and especially if you never played drums like this before, it might be super eye-opening that you can play melodies. It's like, wow, I'm a drummer, but I can play all those sorts of sounds. I find this super amazing. But if you use those Ableton sounds, it really depends on the sound, because there are some sounds that you open and you don't hear anything, which is due to the sound settings, because all those patches have been designed mainly for keys. So with drums, you only send out one short impulse, and some sounds, for example, are designed for building up over time. So you don't even reach that point if you have like this short impulse. So be open for that some sounds just don't work. But again, there are some MIDI effects that you can try that might be fun. For example, note length, because it basically makes your note longer, which you sometimes need. So here with the bass sound, you will see that we get some longer sound now instead of the short one. It's not the perfect example because it just has a short impulse and then this scrolling sub bass, but I think you see what I mean. And pitch and note length are super useful for any type of synth sound, or also with samplers, it works the same way. And also you can consider using scale, because it can sync basically the tones you send out from your drum kit to a scale. So if you want to play something in minor, you can look for a minor scale. Let's say minor, just minor. And now it will make sure that in case any pad sends out a note that is not part of the, in this case, C minor scale, it will adjust it to the scale. Those are the first things you can explore if you're new to this, and I didn't choose the most awesome sounds because it usually needs some tweaking, but I wanted to do it in a way that you will do it as well, because probably you have Ableton, you will choose some preset sounds or preset samples, and then you have to do the tweaking yourself. You have to find the sounds you like and to adjust them to your playing in the way that you feel comfortable. And it definitely includes some work you have to do yourself, but I think it can be super rewarding to have your own drum kits that are really unique in terms of sounds and how they work together. If you're interested in seeing more videos about using electronic drums creatively, leave me a comment, please, because I bought the kit a few weeks ago. I like it a lot, it's really fun, but I also just want to try if there's an audience for it, if this is interesting, because I think it's so cool to use drumming technique for music production, for playing all sorts of sounds, and I'm super excited about it. I've already done it with the Nord drum. You can find many videos on my channel. I'm also going to link you a few inside the video description. But yeah, I'm really looking for some feedback here in case you're interested in this type of videos. And also I posted a little performance video the other week. I'm going to link it here. It also includes the syntact, and it was really fun. Also played without a click, just a little hybrid patch, and this is maybe something I would focus on more in some other videos, setting up some cool patches like that one. And apart from that, I wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create, and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye.